Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
This is my first post on this subreddit, but I recently can't get the story out of my head and I need to put it down so that I can move on and forget. I met Leo, 18 male at that time, during my junior year of high school. I'm a female and I was 17 at that time. Leo was an immigrant from Guatemala and he was new to my school. We had many classes together, but we both enjoyed choir a lot. One day, when we were coming back from a choir trip, I mustered up the courage to sit with him on the bus and begin a conversation. He charmed me immediately. We talked for 3 hours and enjoyed the time so much. He then gave me a cute origami boat with his number and Snapchat on it, and I had fallen hard. We spent the next 10 days messaging and snapping every single day. We sat next to each other in every class, and we also started eating lunch in the library together. I began to notice a few red flags that I chose to ignore because I thought that I was being crazy. The first was that any time that I invited him to an activity or hangout outside of school, he would blatantly refuse. There was never any excuse or reason, and the answer was simply no. I invited him to several things, even some with my family, and he would never consider it. The next red flag started when he would ask me questions, but never allow me to answer them. He would ask a question, and right as I begin to respond, he would interrupt it with a much more personal question. For example, "What are you doing today?" "Oh, I'm going to... How many boyfriends have you had?" It was really strange. On day 10, I was walking my dog and I got a strange message from him. It said, "I had a dream and I want to tell you about it." At first, I was thrilled and I was curious. But then when he started sending a bunch of messages through, I got really sick. The dreams he had were a bunch of very descriptive, sexual fantasies about me. All of them were sickening and objectified my body in ways that no one would be comfortable. He started telling me the types of nude photos that he wanted to take of me and the things that he wanted me to be doing to myself in them. It wasn't sexy, it was scary. And then he told me how he wanted to meet up in secret several times a week that nobody would know. And that's when I responded, "No, please, never talk to me again." And I blocked him on everything. I called my friend who had him on Snapchat as well, and she frantically told me that he was adding photos to his story. All of them were pornographic photos of girls that look a lot like me. They had the same body shape, the hair color, the skin tone. He did this for 2 months until he graduated and announced to the class that he would be moving to California. Throughout those 2 months, he would constantly try to talk to me at school, the way he first did when we were harmlessly flirting. But I shut it down and I told him to go away. And I thought that I was in the clear, but that was not the case. All summer, I would get messages from random numbers saying, "You look pretty in that pink shirt." "What did you order?" "I ordered a burger." "It's a nice day for the fair, right?" Anytime that I went out with friends, he was there. I would never see him, but he would message me something so that I would know that he was there. All of the numbers were burner phones. At the same time, he was posting photos on his Instagram of being in California, about his new life there and how he was getting a new job a house, and many more. None of the pictures had his face in them though. I deleted all of my socials and I changed my number. And eventually, after I graduated, my family moved to a new town and I followed. He clearly no longer knew where I was, but I would still get messages, some emails, fake profiles of him, just trying to stalk my friends and family. It continued for 3 more years until one day he just stopped. I've never heard from him again. Eventually, I got my socials back, but I made everything private. I'm now married and killing it at my job, but I will never forget this awful experience. Every few years, it resurfaces and plays through my mind on repeat for months. So Leo, let's not meet. This happened like 6 to 7 years ago now, so feel free to ask any questions. Your questions might help me jog my memory and I'll remember more details. I played soccer for 1 year in community college after high school. I knew this guy because he worked for the athletics department. He was also another student. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I had a 1-hour gap between classes. This guy noticed me in the library, asked what I was doing there, and I told him that I had an hour-long gap, and then he started coming regularly to hang out. I didn't mind because he really seemed like a normal guy. He wasn't waiting for anything, but he just wanted to hang out. He brought me little gifts a few times like chocolate and stuff, and he was being a little too sweet for someone that I barely know. I didn't think about red flags back then. With the gifts, I remember that he always downplayed it. He'd be like, "Oh, they had extra Kit Kat bars today in the office. Do you want some?" He never said that he purposely bought Kit Kat for me. I know a lot more about boys now than I knew back then, and I think that he knew that buying me gifts would be too much, but he still wanted to do it without doing it. The soccer season for us ended before Thanksgiving, and the only teams that kept playing after that were going to the playoffs, not us. So after Thanksgiving, we had finals. In that brief period after the soccer season and before Thanksgiving, he asked me about my classes for second semester. To be honest, I hadn't been super organized with course registration, and I honestly didn't know. Also, the counselors were completely clueless. I didn't tell him that, but I remember saying that I didn't want to have another gap hour like this because it wasted so much time. And I don't think that I was happy to hear that. He also asked if I would play another season, and I said no to that. I needed to manage my time better, and playing soccer every day was not helping me. I think my mistake was that I just said too much and unfiltered. I used to do that a lot back then, saying too much without thinking about how it can affect other people's feelings. That was on the last Thursday before Thanksgiving, so no more hour gaps to hang out anymore. We had Thanksgiving break, we took finals, and then we had winter break and everything was great. Winter break was when the real problem started. In the mornings, this guy literally showed up outside my house while sitting in his car. The first time, I didn't believe that it was actually him. The second time, I checked and it was. And by then, it was really clear that we both knew what was going on. He was stalking me. And that wasn't all. I posted on my Instagram stories sometimes about places that I was in. This guy literally showed up there several times, like girly stores at the mall where he had zero business being. He did lots of things like that. He also started pointing his phone at me like he was taking pictures, and that was even weirder. I basically stopped using social media over this. After winter break, this continued. When my parents were at work, this guy came during the afternoon too. I called the cops a few times. They went and tried to talk to him, but he basically told them that he wasn't going to talk and that was it. I think the cops wanted to help, but they could never do anything about it because he was careful not to break the law. Like, he didn't trespass, he didn't make any threats, and he didn't show any weapons. I have no idea what he's doing now, and my guess is that he gave up. Maybe his little obsession kind of became old, and he found other things to pay more attention to. At least, I hope so. But if he still comes by, I have no idea. I think the most challenging thing is that I couldn't tell my parents, since I knew that they would completely freak out. I came here to tell you my story because there are people that go through these types of relationships who are maybe still healing, but I also need some advice. I'm a 17-year-old girl, and when I was 14, I liked older guys. And not guys who were 1 year older than me, I mean 3 to 4 years older. And that's when I met my ex. He was 17 at that time, and he was a really sweet guy, until he started opening up about his mental health and also his drug addiction. And don't get me wrong, I don't judge him for being mentally unstable, but he never took his prescription and he just threw tantrums all day, verbally abused me, and overall didn't care about me. I was with him for 2 years until one day he finally blocked me, basically ending our relationship, and I never heard from him since. Well, until 2 months ago. I came home from school one day and I looked into the mailbox because I saw an envelope. It was unusual for us to receive envelopes unless it was a bill. But it wasn't an envelope for bills. It was one meant for letters. I put it in my purse and I went inside the house. I then went into my room after I said hi to my mom and I opened it up. There was no return address or something like that, but my name on the letter caught my attention. I never received letters from anyone, and I was worried to see a signature that I recognized on it. I started reading the letter. Well, hardly, because the writing was awful. But the person who sent it was telling me how they regret letting me go and that they wanted me back. I thought that one of my friends was playing a stupid prank on me, so I just brushed it off and I put it in my drawer. I was actually laughing about the situation. And later at night, when I was about to go to sleep, there was an unknown number that showed up on my screen. I looked at the screen, confused, because I barely received such weird calls from unknown numbers. I didn't really want to pick up, but I thought that maybe it was one of my friends who was trying to pull one of their prank calls on me, as usual. I picked up and I heard breathing. "Hello?" I said, but there was no answer. So I added, "Beatrice? Are you this bored that you want to pull pranks on me?" And still no answer, just heavy breathing from the other end. But all of a sudden, I heard his voice. "Who's Beatrice?" My eyes were wide open and I hung up. I stared at the ceiling in disbelief and I put my phone on silence mode and I just went to sleep. I didn't think for 1 second that this phone call was about to be the beginning of my biggest nightmare. I woke up the next morning with several calls from that unknown number and I got a little scared. I opened my phone and I saw messages from the same person telling me to pick up and to just talk to them. I tried to ignore it, but the calls and the messages continued even after I got to school. When I was outside the school gates and smoking a cigarette with my friend, I got a call again. I answered, and I gave an upset answer. I said, "Dude, who the hell are you? Why are you calling me?" The person sat in silence for a few seconds, and then they said my friend's name. They heard their name and asked me who the hell was I on the phone with, and then he said, "You are with..." They then say my friend's name. "Aren't you?" Of course you are. I can see you." I looked around and I didn't see anyone other than my other schoolmates. There were only 6 people around us and nobody was on a call or something. I got creeped out and I hung up. I recognized that voice. It was my ex's. I told my friend that he kept calling me and texting me from an unknown number since last night and that I didn't know what to do. She said that I can't really do anything about it and that I should just ignore the calls. But as time went on, I started to get more letters, sometimes even flowers right next to the fence of my home. For context, my ex was from another city and I never told him where I lived. He knew what school I went to, but never which class I was in. But then, I started to get single roses once a week on my desk when I got to school. My classmates told me that they never saw the person who brought me the roses, but they were always there by the time that they got to class. I was super paranoid. I then started to receive pictures of me and my friends outside the school gate. Sometimes, even when I was alone. I was shitting my pants whenever I saw the unknown number pop up on the screen with a picture attached to the message. I finally had enough one day and I called this number that was saved in my phone. I called him, but he never picked up. I started texting him on the apps that I didn't get blocked on, and I told him to stop or I will contact his boss and I will complain about his behavior and even make fake complaints about his service at work so that he would get fired. He really needed the job, so he kinda left me alone for like a week. But then, I started to see him on the street, in public transport, and also outside my school. Mind you, this dude lived in another country by the time that we broke up, and only came back when he started texting me again. I asked some of his friends about the time that he got back, and they told me that he came back into our home country the day that I started getting the calls. I could barely leave the house after I found out that he knew my school schedule, and I always asked one of my classmates who lived nearby to pick me up with their car on our way to school. But one day, I wasn't so lucky, and my classmate who used to drive me to school was sick and couldn't show up, so unfortunately, I had to take the bus that day. When I got on my bus, I saw his blonde wavy hair and I froze. I literally wanted to cry and I didn't know how to get out of the bus without him getting off at the same stop with me. In my country, we aren't supposed to talk to the driver while he's driving, but I had no other choice than to ask him not to let him out of the bus. I explained the situation, and he was, thankfully, very understanding, and he didn't let him off the bus. He was banging on the glass doors, and he was screaming to be let off at the stop, but the driver just kept the door shut and then drove off. I then sighed in relief and I started crying while I was waiting for another bus to come. It's been a month since school ended, and I haven't seen him after that. But I am scared that he might come back when school starts. The police won't do anything about it, and I even started getting threatening letters 2 weeks ago. I carry a pocket knife with me when I go out, and I even changed my phone number. But I don't know what else I can do. To note, he has a twin brother. I knew this, but I never thought that maybe his brother is also involved in this. I'm starting to think that they're on this together, and this is why that I see him so often. Update. Hello guys. After I posted this, nothing really happened except one thing. I was going to the airport in the capital, and I bumped into him in the bus on my way there. This really freaked me out because I don't live in the capital and he doesn't either. I was really frightened, and maybe out of, I don't know, fear or anger, I just hit him in the face and I just threw fists and yelled at him. I got off the bus as fast as I could and I ran to the closest taxi station. And that's how I got at the airport. He started sending me pictures of myself again, and I had a total meltdown in the middle of the airport. I finally blocked his number after I got through security because I just couldn't care less about evidence at this point. I'm in another country now, and he has left me alone. Well, at least for now. I'm going back to school in 2 weeks, and I swear to God that if I get another message or letter from him, I'll be the one getting arrested. I'm really tired of this, and I can't help but think about the horrible things that I would do to him. I hope I don't sound too crazy, but seriously, I'm desperate to be left alone. Me and a friend that I will call Robert had just spent the day in a city a few hours from our own. We had just spent the day at an event in which we both participated in, and we had an absolute blast. After the event, we decided to go out and then get dinner with a group of our friends, and ended up staying in the city until almost midnight, before we decided that we should probably get going. The drive home was very uneventful for most of the way home. The roads in between the two cities are very rural, with only a few small towns between the two. And since it was dark, we spent most of the drive looking for animals that may run out in the road while chatting with each other. As we got fairly close to Robert's house, we saw a car parked on the opposite side of the road facing the wrong way, and a man walking around on and next to the road. The car in front of us just so happened to be an ambulance, which stopped to try to help the man. And as we drove past, I made eye contact with him, and then we continued on our way thinking nothing of what just happened. We drove for another 20 to 30 minutes before turning onto the access road to get to Robert's house. As we got farther up the road, we noticed another car had turned on the road farther behind us. Robert lives in a gated community, so we had to turn onto the driveway so we could go through the gate. This is when we noticed that the car that had turned before had turned again and was right behind us. As we pulled up to the gate, Robert opened it, and then we drove through. The car behind us had also managed to make it in time before the gate closed. To be honest, neither of us had really thought that we were being followed until this point, but even then we just joked about it. We then drove for a while inside of this neighborhood, which is fairly large, and we noticed that this car was still behind us. The route we took was a large curve, so we figured that he should have turned off by now. But as we got close to his house, we decided to keep going as the road would loop around, and we confirmed that we were being followed. Robert then started driving much quicker through the neighborhood, and the car behind us also sped up. We were going about 50 to 60 on these fairly small roads, but the other car kept up. We drove for a while before we decided to head to the front gate, which had a 24-hour security guard, and we still were not sure if the person following us had a key fob to open the gate or not. We left the neighborhood and then pulled a U-turn back to the front gate. We were still driving very fast at this point, and to anyone, it should have been apparent that we were being chased. As we came back to the front gate, my friend was able to open it in a way that we couldn't be followed. But as we turned the corner, we saw the gate opening and the car that was following us drove in. This is where we made a huge mistake. We turned down a road without realizing that it was a cul-de-sac. As soon as we noticed our mistake, Robert was able to flip the car around so that we could get out of there. But as we drove by the car, I made eye contact with the driver, but I could barely see his face. When we turned out of the cul-de-sac, we turned off the lights and then booked it. We finally had managed to shake him and then get to Robert's house. We waited at Robert's house for the police to arrive, and shortly after the officer had arrived, he got a call on the radio and then he booked it to his car. A few minutes later, 2 more police cars showed up, and we were informed that they had found the car. The man was the same guy that we had passed on the side of the road around an hour earlier. When the police first made contact with him, he refused to speak and did not look like he was in the right state of mind. As the traffic stop proceeded, he began threatening the officers. We later found out that he was mentally ill and an unstable veteran from a couple of states over and had no reason to be anywhere close to where we were. The man had broken the back gate when he followed us in. And the worst of all is that the guy at the front gate, whose only job was not to let people in if they didn't have a fob without stopping at his booth, let this guy in after we had just sped past him. Well, he was quickly fired by the security company. Looking back on this, there is only one thing that I would have changed. I would have called the police sooner, but the adrenaline in the moment clouded our judgment. This is my story about being stalked. Dealing with this has been difficult, and throughout the ordeal, I felt out of control. So I am sharing this to gain control over my story. This story is long as it spanned over 2 years, so I've split it into parts to make it easier to read through. Part 1. Several years ago, I moved abroad to begin a 2-year study course. When I arrived at my apartment, I met 3 of my roommates. Sam was funny and sarcastic, while Bella and Poppy were both nice, some sorority-type girls. We decided to go out for dinner, and I offered to invite our 4th roommate in room 1C, next to mine. Sam warned me not to invite her, saying that she was odd. I was worried because I didn't want to live with a bunch of catty girls. I mean, how were they fighting in less than a day, right? I smiled, and I told Sam that she just made a bad first impression and that I would invite her to get to know her better. Sam grumbled as I left the kitchen, approaching the door next to mine. I knocked on the door and it opened. A short, petite girl with long brown hair and a childlike face stuck her head out. I introduced myself and I invited her to dinner. The girl's face lifted at my invitation as she nodded in agreement. Our excitement about the new school year kept us lively as we arrived at the restaurant. I decided to befriend the girl in room 1C since we were sharing a bathroom. I learned that her name was Snelly, that we were the same age, from the same state, and in the same program. I ordered a Jack and Coke as Nellie leaned into me and asked if I actually drank alcohol. I nodded, thinking her question was odd. We were both in our 20s. Of course, I drink alcohol. Nellie focused her attention on me while we ate, and as I got to know Nellie, I kind of felt bad for her. She was born in Sri Lanka, but immigrated as a kid, and since she had an accent and lisp, I assumed that she was bullied. Nellie was different from me. She was shy and claimed to not have any hobbies nor friends. But I figured that, since we were in the same program, I could befriend her. I asked her if she wanted to sit with me in class, and she happily agreed. I felt content knowing that I was befriending her like I was doing a good deed. Part 2. My first 2 weeks abroad went smoothly. I got used to my surroundings, I've made friends, and I got along with my roommates. Sam, Bella, Poppy, and I would often cook and eat dinner together while chatting about our days. Nellie and I got along, but she was socially awkward, so I made it my goal to befriend her, which was easy because we sat together in lecture every day. We even opened our bedroom doors in unison, and I would open my door, then Nellie would open hers and ask me where I was going. One night, I left my room to go grocery shopping when Nellie's door opened and she asked to join me. I agreed, and then she hurriedly put on her sandals and her neon pink coat. I walked through the aisle, and Nellie silently followed closely behind me, and eventually, I found everything that I needed. But Nellie said that she wasn't buying anything, and after I paid for everything, we began to exit the store, and the alarms went off. I stopped to show the security guard my receipt, and he looked in my bags confirming that I had not stolen anything. I didn't think much of this incident, but when I stood at the front of the store with Nellie for the 4th time as my bags were searched by security, a thought crept into my mind. The alarms never rang when I was alone, or even with friends. They only rang when I was with Nellie. I shook my head. Nellie couldn't be stealing. I was with her the whole time. She was a perfectly nice, normal girl, and I was rude to think anything contrary. Part 3. The harmony in the apartment only lasted 2 weeks. One morning, I shuffled into the bathroom and I saw that the toilet was completely filled with 2 or 3 rolls of dry, unraveled toilet paper spilling onto the floor. However, what concerned me the most was the huge wad of hair that sat directly on top of the toilet paper. I knew then that it was Nellie who had done this. She was the only person who had a bathroom key, and her hair color was a match. I tried to think of any reason that Nellie would do this. Maybe she clogged the toilet, then stuffed it with toilet paper to hide her business. But that didn't explain the hair to me. I couldn't harp on the issue though, so I made a maintenance request to have someone unclog the toilet, and when I came home from class, the toilet was unclogged. I studied for 2 hours before going back to the bathroom, and I was annoyed when I found out that the toilet clogged again, toilet paper, hair, and all. This obviously wasn't a mistake anymore, and now we were out of toilet paper. I knew that I had to say something, but I didn't want to directly confront Nellie about this awkward topic. So I sent a passive, non-aggressive text. Hey, if something goes wrong with the toilet, can you make a maintenance request right away, please? I sent the message, careful not to make it accusatory. I didn't want there to be any tension with Nellie, especially since she still sat with me in class. Nellie never acknowledged the situation. She still opened her door with mine. She still hung out with me and sat with me in class. And for the next 2 months, I just dealt with the constant toilet paper and torn out hair. I tried sending more texts, but it didn't help. Nellie would clog the toilet, and I'd make a maintenance request. A staff member would clean Nellie's mess, and then she would do it again. Eventually, after 12 clogged toilets, I was so annoyed that I decided to confront Nellie. Nellie, I know you're clogging the toilet and you need to stop. If you do it again, I'm going to report you. I pressed send as I walked to class. I decided that I wouldn't sit with Nellie anymore. I had different friends to sit with who didn't clog my toilet. And as I sat down with Reagan and Charlotte, I felt bad seeing Nellie sit alone across the lecture hall. I promised myself that I'd still be friends with her, and that everything would be fine. Part 4. I was happy that the holiday break was soon and that Nellie never addressed me not sitting with her. My message had worked. Nellie stopped clogging the toilet and we were still friends. But I came home one day in early December and my nose scrunched in disgust. There was a sickly sweet rotten yogurt-like smell coming from Nellie's room. I didn't want to confront Nellie so soon after messaging her about the toilet. So for 2 weeks, I avoided the problem. I didn't address the issue until 2 weeks later when all of our food started to rot almost immediately after buying it. Bella, Sam, and Poppy were complaining about how maintenance hadn't found the source of what was causing our food to rot. When I brought up the horrible smell and an accompanying fly infestation, the girls went to go smell the hallway outside of Nellie's room and returned a minute later coughing and gagging. We posited about what may be causing the smell. When Sam brought up seeing Nellie at 2 a.m. skipping through the woods. Sam was heading back from the club and Nellie was skipping around like a possessed doll, according to Sam. And as we spoke, Nellie entered the kitchen and everyone fell quiet. Sam bluntly asked Nellie what the smell in her room was, and Nellie just silently shrugged her shoulders. Annoyed by this, Sam stood up and grabbed Nellie's arm, guiding her into the hallway as the rest of us followed, covering our noses with our sleeves. Nellie claimed to not smell anything, but her eyes were darting rapidly between the three of us. Sam made a sarcastic comment toward Nellie as we returned to the kitchen without Nellie. Sam was a bit harsh and a part of me felt bad for Nellie. At least, Christmas would be relaxing. I spent 2 weeks at a friend's house with her family for Christmas. They were all welcoming, so I didn't miss home too much. My friend knew about Nellie, so she bought me scented candles for Christmas. And when I returned to the apartment, I felt rested and equipped to face the new year. Part 5. My January exams were online and pretty easy, so I was surprised when Nellie texted me asking if I would cheat with her on the final exam. I politely declined, and she asked if I would go to lunch the next day. I had no plans, so I accepted her invitation. I spent a lot of time with her, but she never actually spoke much. So despite everything, I wanted to get to know her better. Once we were at the restaurant, I racked my brain for things that I could talk with Nellie about. I was attempting to break the awkward silence between us, so I asked her what her favorite show was. Nellie told me that she loves to watch Sophia the First. I was confused. Sophia the First is a Disney toddler show that came out when we were teens. Why was she watching a show for toddlers in her 20s? I didn't know how to expand on what she said, so I changed the topic and I asked her what her favorite hobby was. Nellie giggled and said, "Oh, I do this a lot actually. I listen to you through the walls. They're so thin, I barely put my ear against it. I hear you talk to your parents every day." I tried not to look horrified as I sat there confused and a little scared. Then Nellie started laughing. You're like a mother, but I'm an aunt and we're sisters together." I smiled awkwardly and nodded, and I had no clue how to respond. In a desperate attempt to change topics, I asked her about her childhood in Sri Lanka. Nellie slammed her fist on the table, sending my rice flying off the plate. Nellie yelled that she was not from there, and I apologized, even though she definitely told me that she was from Sri Lanka. Then Nellie began to laugh again. She said, "I have plans for us tonight. We'll go to the graveyard and walk around. You'll be scared, but I'll have fun with you." Nellie's eyes were opened incredibly wide and her mouth seemed to open more than usual. She was scaring me, and I didn't want to be rude, so I said that I would invite our other roommates too. At that, Nellie let go of her fork and quickly moved her hand onto mine. She insisted that we had to go alone. I pulled my hand back, attempting to hide my grimace, and I started out a disingenuous, maybe? Nellie leaned back slowly, rolling her head from one side to the other, and mumbled about how fun it will be. The rest of our lunch was silent, and when we got back to the apartment, I said goodbye to her and I went into my room. I didn't call my parents that night. I went to bed early, hoping to quell my anxiety and get some much-needed rest. Part 6. The next day, I did laundry, and then I went shopping, and by 2 p.m., I was meal prepping for the week. I jumped when Nellie asked me to go to the movies with her. I hadn't heard her come into the kitchen, but there she stood, her head down and eyes turned up staring at me. I declined her request, but she repeated her question. I politely declined once again, trying to offset her bizarre vibe. Nellie didn't respond and retreated back to her room, then left for the movies. An hour later, I went to the bathroom, and when I opened the door, I gagged immediately. The smell was bad, but the sight was worse. The walls, floors, doors, sink, and toilet were covered in smeared poop and blood. I could see distinct handprints, and I closed the door trying not to puke. I was shocked that Nellie had done this, but my shock turned into anger as I messaged Nellie. "What you did is weird and disgusting. You need to clean it and I'm going to report you." I pressed send, and I no longer cared about being friends with Nellie. I felt gross, so I went to our shower room next to the bathroom. But Nellie ruined that too. There was toilet paper shoved in the shower drain and wads of toilet paper crusted onto the walls. I was livid at this point, but I had to wait until Monday to report her. So I lay down to take a nap. 2 hours later, I was awoken by Nellie slamming the front door. I heard her footsteps until her feet were visible through the crack under my door. I expected her to knock, but she didn't. Instead, Nellie began to continuously chirp like a bird. She briefly paused and began twisting my doorknob in unison with her chirps. I stood there unnerved as Nellie did this for 5 minutes. And then, Nellie began to rapidly knock on my door and call my phone. 7 times she called, hung up, then called again, while still rapidly knocking. Nellie then began to ram her body into my door over and over and over again, and the shock of it made me stumble back onto my bed. Then, as suddenly as it started, Nellie stopped, her feet still visible under my door, and my phone buzzed and I slowly unlocked it, staring down in horror at Nellie's text. "The cockroach screamed, 'Why do this to me? Because you couldn't be positive in a negative situation?' The doctor said. The doctor pulls off the cockroach's legs and it cries. The doctor has no choice. The cockroach must be killed and its family taken away. You are the funny cockroach." I was terrified as Nellie began to knock and chirp. I was scared to call the cops because I was on a visa, and if they didn't believe me, I could be deported for making a false report. I texted Poppy and Bella, who had heard everything, and Nellie stood there for an hour straight, occasionally pushing her fingers through the crack under my door. When Bella's boyfriend arrived, and his presence scared Nellie away. We met up and talked about what had happened before going to bed. And that night, I barely slept. I was too scared. Part 7. I awoke the next day, anxious about the previous night's events. I tried to convince myself that it wasn't that bad. However, as I peeked into the bathroom, its condition suggested otherwise. Charlotte and Regan were skipping class, so I sat alone. I saw Nellie enter the room, bypass her regular seat, weave through the aisles and inspect each row as she passed. and I sank in my chair as she got closer, horrified by the realization that she was searching for me. With the last night's memories fresh in my mind, I froze in fear when Nellie found me and robotically bent down to meet my eyeline as she sat next to me with her mouth twisted up into a sinister smile. I did nothing as she sat next to me. I was too scared to move and worried that any tiny shift may cause her to attack. When the professor dismissed us, I shot up, frantically packing my things, and Nellie asked where I was going, and I lied to her, saying that I was going to the cafe. I didn't want her to know where I was, so I went home for lunch and I stood in the kitchen, and the door opened. "You are not at the cafe." Nellie's eyes darted up to me. She was looking at the knife on the table. I apologized and told Nellie my plans had changed. My heart raced as I asked her if she liked the lecture. Nellie didn't respond. She just stared with her head tilted and mouth agape. I asked again, but she still didn't answer, and I faced her afraid that she would use the knife on me. She glared so intently that her veins were protruding. She stood there for 10 minutes before leaving. And later on, I walked to the library and froze as I saw Nellie's pink jacket behind me. I turned to see Nellie staring straight at me with vacant eyes. She followed me into the library, up to the 3rd floor, and then sat directly behind me. With her threat still fresh in my mind, I moved to a different spot, but Nellie followed me. I tried again, but she still followed. I was scared to be isolated in a library with her, so I decided to leave. I quickly weaved through the bookshelves, desperately trying to reach the lobby, but Nellie matched my pace, and I was nearing a heart attack when I ran into my guardian angel, Sam. "Nellie's following me," I blurted out. Sam looked at Nellie, who had stopped 5 feet behind me. Sam nonchalantly told Nellie to fuck off, and I was surprised when Nellie did just that. After Sam and I spoke for a bit, my phone buzzed. It was Nellie, inviting me to the graveyard that night. Sam told me that I would be smart to move out, and she was right. I needed to report Nellie and then move out. It wasn't safe for me to live in that apartment anymore, and I needed to get away. Part 8. I went to Reagan's apartment as she was the closest person I had to family while I was abroad. She gave me refuge while listening to me retell the last 48 miserable hours of my life. She reassured me that I could stay with her as I held back tears. My phone buzzed. Sam texted that she needed help and to go to the apartment ASAP. I was hesitant to go back in there, but I couldn't just abandon Sam, so I grabbed my stuff and I told Reagan that I'd be back soon. I walked to my apartment and stared up at it, feeling a lot like the priest in the Exorcist movie. When I got to my door, I was immediately greeted by my 3 roommates' distraught faces. I followed them into the apartment, and my eyes grew wide as Sam pushed open the kitchen door to reveal a truly demonic sight. Huge amounts of congealed red and orange liquid pooled across the floor, leading beneath our table where a small bird lay dead with its wings outstretched and its head missing. I felt sick. The windows don't open, so it didn't get in there by itself. Nellie had either found this bird and brought it into the kitchen, or she killed and decapitated a living bird and then put it in the kitchen. I didn't like either of those options. I assured my roommates that I would report Nellie that night, and that's exactly what I did. I spoke to the school safety board, and things moved fast. I discovered that Nellie had lied to us about her name and age. Officials in hazmat suits came to clean the kitchen in Nellie's room. The board had me send them photos of myself daily in case Nellie killed me, and they had to identify me. I quickly moved out, and since Nellie avoided the other girls, they decided to stay. I declined to submit Nellie for expulsion because I felt bad for her, and I thought that moving on would stop her obsession with me. I was incredibly misguided. Part 9. I was happy that my new roommates were normal and no Nelly incidents had happened for 2 weeks. I did have a large uptick in random daily Facebook and Instagram follower requests from blank profile users. I knew who was behind this, but I was avoiding any Nelly-related thoughts. I was having night terrors, and the more I thought about her, the worse they got. I blocked another user as I sat down with Reagan and Charlotte in an almost empty lecture hall. Charlotte nudged me as Nelly entered the room, bypassing her usual seat, and I felt myself freeze up as she entered our row and began walking toward me, staring at me with her dead eyes. "Don't fucking sit next to me," I said, shocked by my bravery. Nelly responded by sitting 10 seats down from me, not breaking eye contact, and I considered that a win. After class, I went home and then walked to the store. I forgot to grab a card, so I quickly turned around to fetch one and ran into someone standing directly behind me. It was Nelly. Did she follow me from my apartment? Does she know where I live? My heart stopped as I backed into another aisle, and Nelly followed. I walked to another aisle, but Nelly followed me, matching my pace until I went to another aisle and she began to run. I ran away terrified, and Nelly only stopped when I got to the security desk. Security offered to call the police, but I declined, and I gave them my email to send me the footage of Nelly chasing me. I had to report Nelly, but since I still had class that day, I decided to report her the next day. 2 hours later, as I waited for Reagan to walk with me to class, I caught Nelly staring at me across the street, but she didn't approach me and walked with the crowd towards the campus. And minutes later, Reagan found me and we headed to class together. I walked beside Reagan past the buildings and alleyways until a rock caught in my shoe and I bent down to fix it. Reagan switched to the right side of me to look at a billboard, and when I removed the rock, we began walking again. I turned my head to speak when Nelly jumped out of an alleyway and onto Reagan. Her hands were outstretched and clasped around Reagan's neck. Words cannot explain how terrified I was. Nelly let go immediately, and Reagan grabbed my arm, walking forward. Nelly began walking shoulder to shoulder with me, her head turned sideways at an unnatural angle. The look in her eyes was not human. Reagan told me to run, and we bolted across the street. Nelly paused but walked away, traffic stopping her from crossing. We stopped, and Reagan leaned against the fence as I bent over and covered my mouth from trying not to vomit. And after a while, we continued our walk to class in silence. We made it to the lobby and headed for the staircase, but Nelly stood at the bottom of it. I won't let her walk behind me," I said, with my voice shaking. Reagan nodded and we followed a large crowd after Nelly walked upstairs, only to find her holding the door open for everyone. Nelly stared at me through the crowd until everyone but Reagan and I had passed through. "It's okay, you can go first," Reagan said while smiling at Nelly. I was shocked at how composed she was, and even more shocked that Nelly listened. When we sat down in class, Nelly tried to sit behind me, but someone was saving the seat for his friend, so Nelly left. I didn't pay attention to that lecture. I sat there shocked and terrified while Reagan hunched low in her seat, rubbing her neck. I felt horrible for bringing her into this Nelly crap, and I knew then that Nelly needed to be expelled no matter what. Part 10. The next day, I reported Nelly to the Student Safety Board and they raised the issue to the disciplinary board. I submitted a lengthy report detailing everything Nelly had done. I included Reagan, Bella, Poppy, and Sam as witnesses, and I gave photographic evidence of the threats, the calls, the smeared poop and blood, clogged showers and toilets, and the stalking. And the next week, I met with the disciplinary board to go over their conclusions. They informed me that they had reviewed my report, met with Nelly to give her a copy of my report, discussed my accusations, and had come to a conclusion. They acknowledged that everything I had reported was factual, but they didn't think that Nellie had any malicious intent, so they would grant a no-contact order, but that Nellie wouldn't be expelled. I was completely perplexed by their conclusion, and I asked him what Nellie had said about all of this, but they refused to tell me anything. I was at a loss for words. I couldn't believe that Nellie was given my full report, knew everything that I said, and knew the witnesses' names. The school put us all in danger, yet they wouldn't allow me to know if Nellie had even denied her actions. I was devastated. I felt my mind go numb. I knew at that moment that they didn't care, that they were going to prioritize a predator. So with no other options, I agreed to the no-contact order. The worker tried to get me to sign a non-disclosure agreement so that I wouldn't speak about what Nellie did to me or how the school dealt with my case, but I refused to sign it. The next day, I received an email confirmation that Nellie had agreed to a no-contact order. But I knew that meant nothing. Nellie wouldn't get help, and she would never stop stalking me. Part 11. My sophomore year was plagued with a relentless pattern of Nellie stalking me from place to place, sitting next to me in class, standing next to me in hallways, and staring at me daily. Her action was so unnerving and obvious that multiple strangers warned me about her. I reported these incidents every time they occurred, and the school always responded by stating that they would remind Nellie of the no-contact order. And they never took any further steps to help me. In sophomore year, Nellie found other roommates, and in them, new victims. She was evicted from an off-campus apartment, and her new roommates, who once sat with her, began to sit far away from Nellie, and they looked terrified. They looked like me. Having incidents happen weekly and having to see Nellie daily made it impossible for me to move on. I was always in flight or freeze mode, and I was terrified by what Nellie had done and still might do to me. I became a sunken-in, miserable and defeated version of myself. I wanted revenge, a natural result of the boiling rage that I felt. Now at a constant simmer after Nellie was coddled by a university that failed to shell out even a minor consequence for the terror that she imposed on me. I wanted Nellie to suffer in the exact same way she made me suffer. I know, if I had just grown a pair at any point in those early months, I likely could have saved myself and others from suffering. Nellie was likely stalking me from the moment that I met her. I just hadn't realized it, and it weighs heavily on me to know that I played a large part in my own suffering. No matter what I write, I can't begin to recreate the evil that radiated off Nellie. I have daily night terrors, and I don't go into new situations. I don't speak to new people, and I don't make friends. I'm not nice to strangers because I don't want to invite something like this into my life again. Revenge came on graduation day, when Nellie's name didn't appear in the book of graduates. She had failed second year, but despite everything, I couldn't help but think that I was a bad person for being content with Nellie failing. Maybe I was just happy that I could finally move on.
And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. I would also like to give some extra love to my Patreon members, my channel members, and also my tippers. Thank you so much. If you would like to extend a little bit more support for the channel, don't forget to leave a like and a comment down below. If you would like to become a Patreon member, a channel member, a tipper, or even to buy merch, check out the links in the description below. Again, thank you. And I hope you stay scared, because your fear feeds me.